If you've ever tried to play D&D before, you can probably relate to the painfully slow and at times boring combat sections. This has definitely been my experience as an active DM for about a year now. Luckily, I have been actively thinking about this problem for quite some time, and I've compiled a list of 7 things you can add to your combat sessions to make your players want to keep playing for hours. Stay tuned. I'll start this list off with a very basic tip, but it's pretty important, and if you're a new player, you might not have even thought of this. First, narrate the significance of each turn and each action. So whenever a player rolls dice or uses an ability, there is a very technical side to it, what the dice do, what the damage numbers are, what the effect is, but you can't forget to describe how that looks for this specific fight, for this world, and for this context. It'll help give the player that haptic feedback of, I tried to do this, and this is the result. So every time a character shoots an arrow and hits a monster, where on the body does it hit that monster? How does the monster react to that? What types of things can the player learn from that shot that will help them later in the fight? Make things less about the numbers and more about the actual game that's happening. Tip number 2, make it a puzzle and not a grind. What I mean by this is oftentimes as players begin to level up, DMs will throw larger and larger monsters with big health pools that deal a lot of damage to make things more interesting, harder for the characters to fight. I don't think this is the best use of the character's brain capacity in late game. I think what you should be doing as players become more and more confident with their characters and how they work, you should be giving the characters combat encounters that have some sort of element of a puzzle in them. An example of this is a necromancer battle. In a necromancer battle, you have one character raising several undead that go and attack the party. One way to fight it is to just keep fighting the undead, but obviously the necromancer will keep raising the undead. So the puzzle is go kill the necromancer and then clear up the undead, even if they're the ones attacking you. This gives monsters weaknesses or patterns to exploit. Rather than trying to hit them a bunch of times, players are trying to be more efficient with their actions and solve the problem first. Number 3, find a way that the monster can exploit the weaknesses in the character. What this does is allow the monsters to be actually intimidating to the players. Imagine you had a party that decided to max out their strength and dexterity so that they could deal a bunch of critical hits and deal a bunch of damage to monsters. Now imagine you threw a monster at them that made them make intelligence saving throws, which they chose to be their dump stat. This would definitely keep them engaged and definitely make them start thinking of more creative resolutions or rethink their decisions. In the end, it will be a more dynamic interaction between the players and the monsters in terms of combat. Number 4, add allies that the players interact with to help them fight. This is something that oftentimes DMs don't do early on because they're too focused on running the monsters in combat. But if you think you can handle it, it will do a lot. So if you had an NPC that was following along the party for whatever reason, that had some sort of unique way of fighting, you could have that NPC have its own turn that helps out the party and constantly be asking the party, hey, what do you need me to do? Do you need me to just heal you guys? Do you need me to try and kill this one creature? For some reason, that I think is more engaging to the players in my experience than just having more players. Because the characters like interacting with the NPCs, it helps them explore the world and develop their characters in terms of how they interact. So I would highly recommend trying to play with your characters rather than just against them. Number 5, take away all your characters' go-to abilities. Now, you don't have to take away everything that they can do, but if you added some sort of restriction, some sort of special rule for this combat session, then the players are forced to think differently, because oftentimes players will fall into a routine of how they run their combats. They either just shoot arrows or use their most impactful spell, and then that's what becomes boring. But if you had some sort of special condition, like all the weapons that the party had was checked at the door to the city, and now when they get into some sort of skirmish, they need to just use their fists or some sort of hidden magic, then the players need to think of something new, and they will start fresh with strategizing about how they want to do their combat. This is another good way to spice things up and give players something to think about. Number 6, break up the fight with dialogue and story segments. Don't be afraid when you're in the middle of combat to jump out of it for a second. Say you wanted the monster to say some sort of one-liner or a few lines to dialogue and try and negotiate with the party, or you had some NPCs trying to say something that might be valuable. You could have the party duck under a bush and strategize for a little bit. This helps to remind the players that you're not just rolling dice to see if you win. It's not just a lottery. You're still playing a game where your characters and their decisions matter. So if you remind them that we're still playing the game that we were playing 20 minutes ago before combat started, then players will start to feel more involved and feel like they should be playing their character even in terms of combat. 7, fudge the dice more. I say fudge the dice meaning don't feel like you're restricted to the rules in D&D or even the dice rolls behind the DM screen. And the reason I say this is because it'll just save you time sometimes. I have an example in terms of a story. I was running a D&D session one time, and the party went off in a direction that I did not expect at all. I did not prepare for it, but I didn't want to pull them away from what they wanted to do. And what they decided to do ran them into a very specific combat encounter that I was not prepared for. So what I had to do was whip together a homebrewed monster on the fly, and I had no time to predetermine this, so I ended up doing something like grabbing a d20, rolling it. That's the damage the monster deals on its turn. And this just made everything better, and I didn't expect that to happen, but not focusing on the actual rules and specifics of how the damage is dealt and if it works, you can kind of guess or determine with the context, do you think this has a high chance of success or a low chance of success? And having bursts of that when the party is in a very fast-paced, intense context can really help speed things up. And I think that's the big problem with the D&D system is it's very slow, but if you can find a way to make it a breeze, then players will start to have a lot more fun with their sessions. So that's all the tips I have for today. If you have any good tips of your own that I haven't mentioned here, please drop a comment because it'll help me and it'll help the community. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to hear more content about D&D, character design, and game design.